All right, sure. Let's jump into it. How would your friends describe you as a kid?
As a kid, I would say a firecracker and a class clown.
Mm. And do you feel like some of those qualities that you had as a kid, do you still have them today?
I'd say yes, just not as much of the dose that I did have. I'm definitely kind of like I love cracking jokes and I try to make the best out of every situation, which
Yeah.
has its pros and cons. But yeah, kind of.
And do you miss it?
Childhood, absolutely. There was no worries in the world, right? Everything was paid for you.
Yeah.
Now that I have a kid, I'm like, this guy has it great. Like he's loving life. I'm over here having to work to keep him alive. But yeah, I miss childhood.
Yeah, love that. And one thing, I mean, we obviously talked about this before, into the education part, but I want to get a bit of context before that. Growing up, was there anything in particular that you wanted to become in the future? Was want to be a doctor, maybe, or something else?
Yeah, honestly, I hate saying this, I really do, but
Okay.
I think like I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And I made it happen. I finally made it happen. So yeah, I wanted to be a founder, but I didn't really know like what, right? I just wanted to like invent something. I wanted to be like invent something and sell it. That was my whole goal.
And what was the inspiration or what fueled this? Obviously, there must have been something that quite interested in you. Were like, you know what? I want to invent things.
Yeah, so a lot of people point like their early childhood dreams and stuff towards like a role model. I think mine was we grew up really poor. And
Hmm.
so my at the time my stepdad, he had a vending machine company, so he had a lot of snacks and stuff, and we had extra snacks in the house. And what I did was I took those snacks, and we lived in like this little apartment community, new build neighborhood, kind of like this community, right? It was still being built. And I would just go steal those snacks from the pantry and sell them to the construction workers for $1 a pop, and that's how I got my toys. And I realized if you work for money, you can get what you want, and that's kind of how I think. When I think back of it, I think that's what shaped me into how I am today. But that's the earliest I could think of.
Love that. And now today, it's easy to romanticize entrepreneurship, but it often comes with sacrifices most people never even get to see. Is there something personal you've given up for the sake of your business that you think would surprise other people if they hear it?
I'm I'm a big advocate for health and fitness and things
Yeah.
like that. So I think I've given up. Like I used to work out 6 days a week. Now I work out 3 days a week. So that's one thing. Um, Outside of that, I mean, this is like your basic answer, but I've also given up like I guess W-2 safety or W-2 income to try to go run off and do my own thing. And I think that while it's a very popular thing to give up, it's also overlooked. Like you don't really realize like the financial misses. Like I don't get any commissions, and that's how I pretty much built the life that I have today. And so, yeah. Those are like the two things that I think I've given up that might not be surprising, but it's kind of surprising.
If you could go back in time, would you still trade these two?
Yeah, yeah. They're yeah.
That was a pretty quick answer. It feels like you just know that you had to kind of make these sacrifices in order to pursue what you actually wanted to do.
Yeah, and I've never been happier working in my life. Like I even when I would make a lot of money in sales, like yeah, the commission checks were great, but I knew that like I still would wake up the next day having to do a forecast call with somebody and have somebody breathing down down my neck. And so I've never been happier working in my life.
And how long were you in sales?
About 7 to 8 years.
How much of that are you still applying today? Because sales is universal, right? You're gonna need it at every stage in life. So how much of that are you still applying today?
Every single bit of it. I would say there's more admin and analytical things that I need to do now. Besides, like in sales, you create pipeline, you move pipeline, you close pipeline. Like that's the only three things that you do as an individual contributor. Now there's so much more as a founder that I have to do. So, but I don't think that we would be where we're at today if I did not have a sales background.
That is very interesting. And now, if you're talking about you as a founder, right? almost everyone has got these little things that drive them nuts in the business world. Especially as a founder, I'm sure there's going to be something that drives you nuts as well. Is there a pet peeve that you have about the industry or other founders that you just can't stand?
Um, I think one of my pet peeves, and I actually have a post going out in the next 19 minutes about this. I
Okay.
think one of my pet peeves is like somebody, for example, I built my entire sales success off of outbound. And it's like one of my pet peeves that founders say is like outbound is dead. And then I take a
Uh,
little bit deeper of a look and I realize like they sell either marketing solutions or networking solutions, or maybe they're an outsourced outbound service. Like I think it's just this cliche thing to get likes and clicks and engagement. Um, and then other things that kind of drive me nuts is when people just think that they know everything and aren't willing to learn or be like, yeah, I was probably wrong there. And so I think that kind of drives me nuts, especially if somebody's done it before, right? They've built something, they've sold a business, and then you ask them how to do things, and then you listen to them and you're like, that's not really applicable to my business, but it's like, no, like this is how you do it. I'm like, yeah. So I think those two things drive me up a wall.
and would you consider yourself as a founder as a generalist or are you a specialist?
I'm a generalist. I'm not crazy good at anything, even like sales. I've done well in sales, but there's so much more room for me to learn. So I think I'm more of a generalist. Like I have a good idea of many things, but I'm not like very in depth with many things.
Interesting. For Troy, I mean, being a founder is not easy, right? And building something up from the ground is definitely not easy at all. What is it that helps you keep going? Because I'm sure as a founder, you must have had moments where you were like, you know what, I'm just going to walk away. Maybe being in a 9 to 5 is easier. So is there something that really keeps you going as opposed to going back to the 9 to 5?
Yeah, so I think it's two things. One thing is something I touched on a bit earlier, where it's just like I've never been happier. And like, yeah, there's stressful moments, and there's many nights that I'm sitting on the couch where my wife's like right there next to me, and I'm just working. Like that's we've compromised. We know
Uh,
multiple nights are for her each week, and then other nights are for working. But I think that's one thing that just keeps me going is like waking up knowing that like my future and like my success and things like that is literally in my hands now. It's not in somebody else's hands. Like that is incredible. And it's like this, my wife was really nervous for me to go full time. And the reason for that is because she said job security, but we have 2 years
exactly.
of runway here at Dimmo. Probably even more than that now at this point with revenue continuing to grow. And I personally believe that 2 years is more job security than any W-2 could probably give me these days, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is like, again, I didn't grow up like financially well, or I wasn't spoiled or anything like that. And so it's like, there's all these things that my friends had and that I wanted, like lake homes and stuff like that, that I wish and I hope that I can give to my son one day. So I think at the end, and we're gonna have another son here, so I'll probably say the same thing to my kids.
Oh,
Um, but I think it's that. It's like, how do I provide a financially happy life? And I don't care about being worth $400 billion. Like that sounds stressful. But it's more so like if we want to go on a family vacation, or if we want to get a home is a little bit more dramatic. But if we want to go on a family vacation, I never want to have to be like, let me check the bank and see if we can do that. I want to just be able to be like, yes, I'll take you to Disneyland. I'll do this. I'll do that. Like that's what I'm working towards. So
I absolutely love that answer. I mean, success and motivation there, they look different for everybody, right? For you, maybe success isn't money, maybe it is money, it's different. But when things get really tough for you, Troy, what is your true why? Is it family? Is it being able to provide a life for them that maybe you did not have in your childhood, as you mentioned? What is the one thing that really keeps you going here?
the one thing would absolutely be family. Um, I have a second thing, but you asked for one, so I'll stop there.
Please continue.
I would say there's just maybe it's I think everybody in the just as a human is a little bit selfish. And so I think from a selfish perspective, like I've been successful in sales, but I do not feel accomplished at all. Like I do not feel like I've accomplished something great. And so like that's why the other day I was like, I'm gonna go run a half marathon, and then did 2 weeks of training because I was like, I want to be like, I've accomplished these things. So I think for me, it's like, yeah, family is my number one why. Like, I'm doing this because I want to look back and be like, I provided this for us. So that's one thing. But then the second thing is like, I want to feel accomplished before my time's up, right? Like, no one's promised tomorrow. So I want to make sure that like whatever I do, I feel accomplished before that time comes, right? And so that's the second thing is the feeling of accomplishment that I came here and I did something great and kind of left my, made sure that my name
Yeah.
left a mark.
I love that. And do you feel like Dimmo is going to be the last thing that is going to help you achieve this, or do you feel like there is something else beyond Dimmo as well?
Um, I hope from a financial perspective, demo is the last thing that helps me achieve this. But after that, I want to help people that were also in my shoes where they're struggling to make the jump from a W-2 to their own thing. Like my goal after demo is to consult these people that are just like, they've got these cool businesses and side gigs that they're running, but they're scared to make the jump. Like, how do I help them do that? So from a financial perspective, I hope that demo's the last thing. From an accomplishment perspective, yeah, I think I would feel accomplished, but then I want to help other people get that feeling as well.
Interesting. I want to go back and rewind a bit. You mentioned that, it's not easy to go from a, let's say, steady check to doing your own thing, not knowing when the next money is going to come in. For you, when you made that decision, Troy, were there some specific elements that were running through your head? Like, okay, I'm doing this, but I'm risking this, and that. Like, how did that decision come about?
Yeah, so I'll give you the straightforward answer here. We ended up raising a little bit of money, and then that's how I was able to go full time. My wife, because I'm essentially like, she works, but she's a social worker, so she's not making a
Hmm.
ton of money. I think that she's overworked and underpaid, but all that to say is she essentially said like you need to be able to pay for our mortgage, you need to be able to pay for our child and daycare and
Of
stuff.
course.
And so I couldn't actually make, and that's why I kind of want to help people in these same scenarios because there's so many people in these scenarios where it's like they need to provide for their family, so they can't just cut off their 300K OTE job and then go
Exactly.
and make nothing. So the way that it essentially worked was she said you can go build a company if you do it with somebody else's money and not ours. Because I had already built 2 side gigs previously with our money, and luckily I was able to make it all back and then some. But it wasn't life changing or anything like that. So yeah, my whole thing was like, okay, well, demo. We launched it May 15th. It had so much traction where I just said, okay, hey, I'm going to go and raise a small angel round, but then I'm going to use that money to just grind as hard as I can and as just work as hard as I can to make it successful. So I didn't I left behind like commissions and all that stuff, but I made sure that for the most part, my salary was pretty replicable.
Love that. And I think those are very valid concerns, right? If somebody wants to jump into this whole solo entrepreneurship route, there are many different contexts that one has to take because not everybody's going through the same journey, right? Somebody has some runway financially, but the other person doesn't have it. So, how important do you think is to take this context into mind when taking such a decision?
The most important. I had 2 calls this week last week. I had 2 calls last week with people that are wanting to build something from 0 to 1, or actually -1 to 0. Really, it's like an idea and how do we get it into something, both in completely different stages of life. One is a single person in his 20s and he works at W-2. He's a sales rep. And like he even said at the end of the call, like, this was very enlightening. Like, I feel like now is the time in my life where I can just do this and not really be too worried. 100%. But then the other one had a family. And it's like, hey, I don't make this much on my side gig yet, but I make a decent amount on my W-2, but most of my time is going to my side gig. At the end of the day, like, if you cannot this is just my opinion, right? Everybody thinks differently. There's some VCs that are out there that are like, you take a risk for your family and I'll fund you and all this stuff. And I'm no, like that it's 2024. Like, world's too damn expensive to worry about all these risks. So for me, it's like my personal belief is if you can provide for your family and you feel comfortable, like, then go and take the risk. But some people are more risk adverse than others. And so I think your personal life situation and what you just asked is the most important thing of deciding whether or not it's a good time to make the jump.
I think that is a very good answer because depending on your personal situation, is how you can decide whether it's worth taking that jump or not. I've personally seen this. I think a lot of people preach go and start your own business and you can do it, this and that, but it's 2024, right? Everything's so damn expensive, and you cannot just take such a big risk that after a month you're like, okay, how do I feed my family now? So stuff
Yeah.
like that is super important. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And now, Troy, I want to steer this conversation into more Dimmo and LinkedIn related. Okay. So you told me on one of our calls before that through your founder brand on LinkedIn, you've driven over 150,000 unique visitors to Dimmo. So just walk us through it. Like, how just big of an impact has your founder brand on LinkedIn had on Dimmo so far?
I don't think I would be running Demo right now if it wasn't for my LinkedIn brand, to be honest. So the impact that just building a brand on LinkedIn has had to Demo is literally everything. 90 to 95% of all of our revenue comes from either people that have heard of us from LinkedIn or people that have followed me previously. Like our entire success right now is based off of LinkedIn. And I know that I think that's a good starting point, and I think that people start there a little bit too late. But I also know that like I can't only rely on LinkedIn to make this a very successful business and feel that accomplishment that I was talking about earlier. So we're definitely like because actually just on a call yesterday, like expanding this brand that I built
Yeah,
across TikTok, YouTube Shorts, YouTube in general, Instagram, like all of that stuff. So um, all that to say, the short answer is it's everything in Demo is or like LinkedIn is the reason for all of Demo's success.
very interesting. And there are sort of different elements to it, right? For example, one of it is you building your founder brand on LinkedIn is community. Building is obviously essential for any brand loyalty out there. You can amplify your message to your current customers and at the same time, potential customers as well. How have you used your LinkedIn presence so far to form this sense of community around your brand? And how much of an impact has that had on Demo?
Yeah. So speaking of community, it's funny. So I have, right now like 32,000 followers or something like that. And there's a reason why I bring up that exact number. I'd say about 6 months ago, I probably had 20 or so. And 6 months ago, maybe even a little bit longer at this point, I ended up launching a sales community, funny enough, where people can go in and learn about jobs, learn about tech stack, learn about tips, prospecting, all of that fun stuff. So I ended up building a community, but I would say that it's weird. I bring this up to my wife a lot. She doesn't really understand it. She's like, Troy, I feel like all you do is make content. You don't really work. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like with Gen Z stepping into the business professional life, like content is going to be the way that people make decisions and build their opinions on companies at some point. And so for me, I think that I've built this kind of like even outside of that actual Slack community that I built, I feel like that I built like the sales community where people just want to come and support another seller that has just been like, in my opinion, my whole thing is I want to continue to provide value and insights and really like actionable sales tips on LinkedIn. And it has built like this sort of sales community. And at this point is building, which I'm so proud of, is like this demo community where people are just shouting out demo and tagging demo in posts when people are looking for technology and all of that stuff. It's like it's becoming I don't want it to be Troy's community anymore. I want it to be like demo as a whole, right? And so it's I think it's extremely important, and we're actually about to release. I'm working on it this week. We're actually about to release communities inside of demo, so then you can be
Nice.
connected with other peers and all that stuff. But yeah, I think community is a huge play for building that loyalty, but also, like you said, an easy way to get prospects in the door. You just got to be a
Yeah,
person that they trust to listen to.
exactly. Speaking of trust, you've built a notable presence as a thought leader, I would say, which is not easy if you're also running a business on the side, right? Because this is one of the major concerns. I've talked to many founders in the past and then say, well, we could be creating content on LinkedIn as a founder, but we would rather spend that time on running the business itself. So how do you, Troy, balance that thought leadership aspect with day-to-day demands of running an actual business or running your SaaS? Are there any specific strategies that you employ that helps you tackle this?
Yeah, so there are. So for me, I make a post usually I make the post, like I write the post that morning and then I post it at 8:30 every morning. And then same thing, I usually write 2 posts a day every single weekday. Sometimes I do one, but 98% of the time I do two. Um, but one is like recycle your content. And so that's huge.
Yeah.
I think that people need to do that way more. It's like if you wrote something 4 months ago and you've gained 10,000 followers since, like 10,000 people probably haven't seen it and then some, right? Like all of your following's not seeing your content all the time.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it comes down to like finding your things that you talk about, so things that you're passionate about, and then finding subtopics of those things. And so, like for example, I love talking about prospecting, but my subtopics would be like cold calling, cold emailing, creative outbound,
Yeah.
videos and prospecting, LinkedIn prospecting, a lot of subtopics. And then from there, I just break those subtopics down to personal stories. So if I've booked a meeting through LinkedIn or through video, now all of those subtopics now have 3 to 5 different personal stories tied to them. Now I have, 60 pieces of content that I can then put it into text form. I can add a picture to it. I can do a video format. So now I have like 180 pieces of content that just comes from prospecting. So that's like my strategy of creating content, but it's, you asked like, what is the importance of the thought leadership? And again, because most of our traffic and most of our revenue comes from my LinkedIn posts and what I'm doing on LinkedIn. Like for right now, running the business, LinkedIn is everything. And people are putting a face behind the brand versus just hearing about Dimmo and not knowing who runs it. So
Yeah, I do love that. A lot of the times people start creating content and then they quit after 2 or 3 months. By people specifically, I mean founders. I have such a strong belief, and I've come across this so many times in the past 2.5, 3 years working with other agencies. As a founder, you don't like ideas, you like structure. As you said, divide your main, you must have a few core content pillars and then you divide them into sub pillars. And that way you will never run out of content. You can even assign specific days in the week that, you know what, on this day I'm going to talk about this, maybe something personal, maybe a case study. So a lot of people don't even start because of this fear. They're like, how are we going to structure our ideas? So what I want to ask you, Troy, is what advice would you offer to other founders who are trying to establish a strong founder brand, but at the same time, they also want to give time to scaling their companies? Is there anything in particular that have helped you in the past in terms of lessons to maintain that balance and actually start building your brand?
yeah, so the advice there would be very specifically like dedicate specific times throughout the day to LinkedIn. And so something about LinkedIn for me, and I guess here I'll break it down a little bit. Like what I think is
Sure.
LinkedIn is a platform where it might be the most taxing social media platform out there. The more time you spend on LinkedIn, the more successful you will be. And I know that that's the same with every other social media, but LinkedIn very specifically, like you have to be scrolling and commenting and engaging and sending connection requests and messaging to really build like this trustworthy personal brand, or else you're just somebody that posts and then nobody really cares because
Yeah.
you're not engaging and you're not really caring about what people are saying. So all that to say is one thing that like Darren McKee, he's pretty big on LinkedIn. I met up with him when I lived in North Carolina. And one thing that he says is 5 minutes at the top of every hour. So like, let's say it's 12:55, he'll jump on his phone and then engage on LinkedIn. So anybody that's commented on his post, or he'll just look for on LinkedIn for 5 minutes and then comment on other people's posts. He'll do that for 5 minutes at the top of every hour throughout the workday. So then you actually get about 45 minutes to an hour on LinkedIn of actually engagement. Um, so when I think of like the balance, I think if you want to grow fast, you got to spend hours on LinkedIn. Like that's just the way that it is. But if you don't want to grow fast, I would dedicate little time blocks all throughout your day, 5, 10 minutes, 6 times a day, and then just comment and engage. But I still think that you have to make a post anywhere from like 3 to 5 times a week to start is pretty good. But at the end of the day, I think engagement is the most important if you are trying to build this founder led brand. Um, so engagement's huge. Don't do what I did. Like and I told my wife in 2023, it was my building year on LinkedIn. Like I definitely got burnt out so many times to the point
Uh,
where like I was performing not as well at my job. I was also running a side gig. So it's probably a little mix of everything. But LinkedIn, like I would just sit there. My son's like trying to play with me and I'm just scrolling, trying to comment on
yeah.
people's posts and stuff. And that I don't ever say that that's the right thing to do. It ended up paying off a little bit, but kind of like what we talked about the sacrifices in the beginning, like that was one
Yeah.
of the sacrifices. Like I didn't get to really enjoy or be intentional about those moments. So, um, yeah, my advice is like try to set aside either like an hour straight or 10 minutes every hour to go and engage and build on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you raised actually a very interesting point. You mentioned that if you just create content and then just sit back, it's not going to work out. Right? That's another reason why people don't see any ROI or results, you could say. I did a post about being consistent on LinkedIn today. And in the post, I mentioned how consistency on LinkedIn does not mean only content. There's so much more going in the back end, right? So, Troy, again, my question is just how important is generating conversations in the DMs, engaging with other people's posts? How much of a role does that play? And maybe how much of a role has that played in you spreading awareness about Dimmo as well? Because, I'm aware that content itself is not enough, right? So how do you go on about that?
Yeah, so I think it plays a massive role, especially in the DMs. So my advice to anybody, like if you're selling a sales product, marketing product, even I know it's not as hot, but like IT engineering, like they're not as active on LinkedIn. Maybe build your brand where they hang out, Reddit, Twitter, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, but those actual like conversations, like people reach out to me all the time. They're like, "Hey, I love Demo. I'd love to chat," and I try my hardest to just give my time to meet people. But nowadays it gets down to the point like once you actually like build and you are getting like I hate even like saying this because it sounds like braggy, but it's not. It's actually more stressful than anything. But like when people are constantly hitting you up for 10, 15 minutes to pick your brain, like you really have to be very um, particular with where you're spending your time,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to scale a business and build your brand and all that stuff, right? And so DMs really big, but even more important if those DMs are with people that are in your potential ICP of who you might sell to down the road or somebody that you'd be open to grabbing a lunch, grabbing lunch or a drink with. I don't think that just meeting people for the sake of meeting people is very effective at all. But I think that you should be particular about who you're meeting with and messaging.
100%. And I think because you've mentioned it before, it can be really taxing and you can't just lend your brain to every other person. You have to be very selective. I love that. Now, Troy, I want to do a tiny bit of an exercise before we jump into our rapid fire section. I'm going to pretend that I'm a founder who wants to start building my founder brand on LinkedIn. I already have a product, a service that I'll have. It's launched already, but I'm a bit hesitant, right? And I come to you and I'm like, Troy, I have a product or a service. I want to build my founder brand on LinkedIn, but I just want to ask you, is the time that I spent on the platform actually worth it in terms of ROI, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, so ROI is all dependent on the on the person and their goals,
Their
right? So like,
goals. Exactly.
yeah, what are you trying to drive revenue? Or are you just trying to drive eyeballs? For me specifically, eyeballs is at the end of the day the biggest currency we can have at Demo. Revenue will come with eyeballs. Like that's the way that I believe businesses work is if you drive eyeballs, revenue will come. I do think that nowadays product has to be pretty good. Like back in the day, it was kind of like you can ship kind of broken products and then just keep iterating. I think
Yeah,
things have changed a little bit because it's so easy to get a product up and running now. So nowadays, I think
exactly.
eyeballs is really important. So if in this position right here, you already have a product and you want to build a founder brand, you're not really understanding or you're not really sure if it's worth the ROI. It depends. What do you want? Do you want people to be aware of your product or do you want to sell your product? If you want to sell your product today, go do cold outbound, jump on the phones, go do emails, do LinkedIn DMs, like only, but with not posting and not engaging. And then you'll probably generate more revenue in the very near future. But if you're trying to build a trustworthy brand and go for the long game where people are, they know you, they know of you, they want to come to you. You don't really need to do much work outside of that. You can eliminate some of the cold calling, cold emailing. Then I think if that's the goal, that's where you should probably focus your time on building a brand.
Love that. And what if I ask you, Troy, I'm going to start building my founder brand, but I want to see results within 3 months. I want to get leads. I want to be this thought leader, but I want to do it quick. What would you answer me?
Yeah, my answer would be post every single day and spend 2 to 3 hours on LinkedIn a day. Like that's at the end of the day, if you want to actually generate results in 3 months, you can. You can generate
Mhm.
results in 3 months, but just know you're not going to do this little 10 minutes, 30 minutes a day on LinkedIn and be able to do that. So it would be it's distribution of efforts, right? Like where is the lowest hanging what's working and then double down on it and spend more time there. So like it will work. You just got to spend more time on it.
Love that. Now, last question before we jump into the rapid fire round is, have you ever calculated, Troy, or maybe even just checked as curiosity, how much would you need to spend on paid ads if you were to generate the same amount of awareness that you're generating through organic content on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I've checked. I've checked with the idea that a
Uh-huh.
CPM is $35, so I'm measuring it off of impressions here. And yeah, so in September I had around it was like $28,000 of earned media value, and then in October it was around $31,000. So for me to generate the impressions that I'm generating on LinkedIn, I would have to spend $27,000 a month on ads.
That is absolutely crazy, isn't it?
It's nuts, and I will not spend money on ads anytime soon.
Love that. Love that. All right. Thank you so much for those answers, Troy. We're going to jump into our rapid fire section now. Just a bit of a recap. You'll only have to answer in one or two sentences maximum. 7 questions in total. Should we jump in?
Let's do it.
Awesome. The first one, I think it's going to be an easy one for you, actually. If someone gave you $1 million right now, but you had to quit Dimmo, what would you do?
Ooh, if somebody gave me $1 million right now and I had to
Yeah.
quit Dimmo, to be honest, I would probably buy a storage facility or a couple of them. And
Okay.
yeah, it might not be an answer that you would think of, but I've
That was
always
actually
wanted to buy.
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've always wanted to own a couple of those because the overhead's not too crazy. So I'd probably with $1 million cash, yeah, probably buy storage facilities, one or two.
Love that. If you could erase one memory from your journey as a founder, what would it be?
Hiring. I hate hiring people. It sucks.
Has there been any incident or something that you feel like you recall to your head?
Um, in
You
regards to
don't need,
hiring,
yeah, you don't need to talk about it if you're not supposed to talk about it.
yeah, no, no, I just think the hiring process sucks. And then when you
Okay.
do have such a large brand name, or not a large, I don't think I'm large at all by any means from a
Mm-hmm.
person from like a personal brand, but when you do have make some noise on LinkedIn and some people don't get the opportunities that others get, they're quick
Mm-hmm.
to target you publicly, and that's happened. And I just think it's stupid. It's interesting,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I suppose it's a part of the whole social media game, isn't it?
it sure is. It's scary out there.
It is. All right. If you could get away with anything for a day, what would it be?
Hmm. I can get away with anything for the day. Um, I would say this is so dumb. I would say, and this is rapid fire, first thing I'm thinking of is eating as much as I possibly can without it affecting like me or my stomach or the calories. Like I want to get away with just eating whatever I want without ever having to worry about it.
I think that is a very popular answer because a lot of us would just want to eat everything that we can without having any effects on us. Love that.
Yeah.
So the next one is if you could trade lives with any other founder for a day, who would it be?
In this exact moment,
Uh-huh.
today, I would say Adam Robinson, just for
Uh,
now. Um, Very controversial person, but I think that he is, from a marketing perspective, really, really intelligent. And I'd like to see how he's running his
yeah.
business bootstrap. So, yeah.
And he's killing it on LinkedIn too.
Oh, he's crushing it. He's crushing it. So, and again, that
Crazy.
this is rapid fire. First thing that's coming to my mind. So, if I
Love
thought
that.
about it, it'd probably be somebody else.
Love that. So the next one is what is the hardest lesson you've learned as a founder that no one warned you about?
I would say the hardest lesson I've learned as a founder that no one warned me about.
Yeah.
I would say that, hmm, I would say the build. So our building traffic. That's the hardest. Like
Mm,
building consistent organic traffic that no one warned me about. Yeah, we have a different business model than like a B2B company, but that's
mhm.
definitely the hardest thing that we're trying to figure out right now.
Interesting. The last two questions now. So the second last is what is the one piece of advice you'd give to your pre-founder self?
To take the risk earlier.
Interesting. Do you feel like you should have taken it earlier?
Yeah, I feel like to either take a risk earlier or start building my brand earlier, one or the other. And I
Mm,
think both of those I should have started 3 years before.
3 years. Wow, awesome. Now the last one is what is your go-to response when somebody says, "Why don't you just get a 9 to 5?"
No. Um,
Yeah.
no chance. No, there's that would be my go-to response. If somebody said that, no, because I'm
No,
much happier than I'd ever be at a 9 to 5.
love that. This was the final question, buddy. But before we wrap it up, I just want to touch upon something that you've kept mentioning throughout this episode is happiness. You've repeatedly said that you've never been happier working on something. Why do you think you feel so liberated? Like, what's so good about this?
I think it's the way that going back to the whole community thing that we talked about, I think it's the way that people talk about Dimmo in such high regard on LinkedIn, and people that I've never met in my entire life like reach out to me and they say, just stuff along the lines of like what you're building can really change the way that B2B, valuation is done and how sales is done. And I think it's like the constant reminders that like, hey, this is incredible. I got a message this morning when I was on the treadmill, and it was like, what you're building at Dimmo is absolutely amazing. I'd love to learn more about it. It's just I think that those constant reminders, like you are doing something great and great for like all parties. It's just like I don't know. Every time I get one, I'm like, thanks. Like that's awesome.
Love that. That must feel good because I assume demo is like a baby to you, right? Because you're growing it, and that must feel great when people are actually praising it.
Yeah. It definitely is. Feels like a baby to me right now.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Troy, for your time and all the amazing answers. I think there's a lot to take away from this episode. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Awesome.